Okay, it's starting. Okay. Um, Good morning. My name is Jackie Yang, hearing officer for San Francisco Public Works. Sarish Waiters is the clerk for this hearing. This hearing is being conducted via Zoom and will be available afterwards through a link on the San Francisco Public Works website, sfpublicworks.org. As this is a virtual hearing, there is no sign-in sheet. So if you would like to receive information about the results of this hearing, please send an email to the email address listed on the hearing notice. If you do not have that with you, please contact the Bureau of Urban Forestry at urbanforestry@sfdpw.org. This public hearing is being held to consider 7 items. Order number 204127. Hazard tree removal within Supervisor District 2. Removal of 5 hazard street trees at the following addresses: 2641 Franklin Street, tree number 1, 56 Cervantes Street, tree number 1, 273 Pixley Street, tree number 1. Those 3 trees will be replaced. 1572 Union Street, tree number 1, 2360 Fillmore Street, tree number 3. These 2 trees will not be replaced because they do not meet the Urban Forestry's guidelines for replacement trees. Staff approved the removals and the public has protested. Order number 204128, hazard tree removal within Supervisor District 4. Removal of 2 hazard street trees at the following addresses: 1522 26th Avenue, tree number 1, 1466 35th Avenue, tree number 1. Staff approved the removal and the public has protested. Order number 204129, hazard tree removal within Supervisor District 5. Removal of 1 hazard street tree at the following address: 1360 Fulton Street, tree number 1. Staff approved the removal and the public has protested. Order number 204130, hazard tree removal within Supervisor District 7. Removal of 4 hazard street trees at the following addresses: 46 Craigmont Avenue, tree number 1, without replacement. Sidewalk too narrow, no other nearby options. 80 Juniperocera Boulevard, that's the nearest address location. 3 trees, tree number 6, 8, 10, located at the curb. These trees will be replaced. Specific locations may shift depending on the overhanging canopies. Staff approved the removals and the public has protested. Order number 204131, hazard tree removal within Supervisor District 8. Removal of 2 hazard street trees at the following addresses: 214 Roanoke Street, tree number 1, 458 Alvarado Street, tree number 1. Staff approved the removal and the public has protested. Order number 20132, hazard tree removal within Supervisor District 9. Removal of 2 hazard street trees at the following addresses: 3915 Folsom Street, tree number 4 and number 5. Staff approved the removals and the public has protested. And lastly, order number 204133, hazard tree removal within Supervisor District 10. Removal of 4 hazard street trees at the following addresses: 1119 Rhode Island Street, tree number 1, 551 Utah Street, tree number 4 and number 5, 900 Carolina Street, tree number 34. These 4 trees, I'm missing one more, sorry. There's 2 trees at 551 Utah Street, tree number 4 and number 5. So these 4 trees will be replaced. Staff approved the removals and the public has protested. My job as the hearing officer is to gather the facts for the hearing item, listen to your testimonies, and help our public works director make these determinations. I will not be making any decisions today. Instead, I will forward the findings from this hearing and make my recommendations to the director. The director will make the final determinations. When the director's determinations are made, the department will notify you of them if you have provided contact information. The hearing will proceed as follows for 7 cases. I will ask Public Works staff to to speak first and present their case. Then I will allow the appellant to speak, then any member of the public or witness who wants to speak, then the department, if the department would like to address any comments, and if so, the appellant, again, if the person has any rebuttals. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes to speak. Again, it's pretty strict, 3 minutes, so just be prepared. The clerk will monitor the time for all speakers and will indicate when the speaker has 30 seconds left. If you are a party to this proceeding, I will call on you to speak. If you would like to use the visual material in your presentation, please let me know before you speak. You would then have the standard 3 minutes to provide your comments. If you are a member of the public or witness who wants to speak, wait for me to call for public comments. Then use Zoom's raise your hand feature to put yourself on the queue to speak. If you have dialed in by phone, raise your hand by pressing *9. And when you are told to you are being unmuted, press *6 to unmute yourself before speaking. When it is your turn to speak, I will recognize you. Again, if you would like to use visual materials for a presentation, please let me know beforehand, and then you'll have your standard 3 minutes to provide comments. Comments and questions should be addressed to me and not to the department or the applicant. If you cannot finish your comments within the allotted time, you may submit written testimony to me by the end of this hearing. If I feel that a question is warranted, I will ask the question. After all comments are completed, I will close the item. We will now begin the hearing. We'll begin with order number 204127. May I have Public Works make its presentation?
Good morning. This is Chris Bock. I'm the urban forester with San Francisco Public Works Bureau of Urban Forestry. And I'm going to bring up a PowerPoint here from the PowerPoint. I just want to confirm if you can see a PowerPoint slide on your screen. So,
yes, we can see it.
Perfect. Thank you. I always like to just double check.
I can see it.
Okay. And MTA is striping our street out front. So there might be a few beeps and honks. With that said, we'll go through the review of the trees for this one. And just in general, Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry, when we identify a tree for removal, very often the tree would have a 30-day notice where we're identifying it as being in poor health or not sustainable. Sometimes a public safety concern, but not an immediate public safety concern or a hazard. So in this particular case, the cases we have today, this morning, are cases where our staff identified very serious potential public safety concerns with the trees. And so this hearing is really to consider trees that have been protested that were posted with 15-day hazard tree notices. So I just thought I'd spell that out from the beginning. So the first order, as you stated, is 204127. These are trees within District 2 that had 15-day removal notices on them, identifying them as hazard trees. So the first tree that I'll review is in front of 2641 Franklin Street. The species is Victorian box, and this tree should be dark green and appear very vigorous and lustrous all year. We might have an image of what a healthy one should look like. So the subject tree is on the left in the foreground. An example of what a healthy Victorian box tree should look like is in the background, both towards the intersection and even beyond that intersection, just a really dark green canopy at all times. So this tree is in severe decline. The lean that it has, the tree established with this lean, so the poor condition of the tree has not caused the tree to lean, but the fact that the tree is in severe decline and has a lean does make it a hazard here. The Latin name for this tree is Pittosporum undulatum, and there's something called Victorian box decline that's a known issue with this species. It's within documents by the UC Cooperative Extension. And so this species was typically very robust, never had issues, but just in the last 8 years or so, we've seen them declining, and it's across California, even particularly down in Southern California. Now this tree can be replaced. The next tree we posted with a 15-day notice that got protested is this acacia. So it's Blackwood Acacia is the common name. The Latin name is Acacia melanoxylon, and it's a fast-growing broadleaf evergreen species. We have planted a lot of them throughout the city. We had a lot of them planted on Divisadero and Haight Street. We have not been planting the species since the late or mid 1990s because of the root failures that we see occur. For this particular case, the issue is in the large stem failure that's occurred. The structural condition of this tree is very poor. And what we're seeing is that these poor unions that have weak points of attachment are splitting apart. And so this tree has split apart, and the additional stems are also prone to failing. And so where these two stems join, there's an old wound in a cavity where decay is present. And so where that attaches to the other stem is a really weak point within the tree. And so we're concerned that this is a hazard, a real failure potential. This tree also can be replaced. The next tree is 273 Pixley. It's a flowering cherry tree that's dead. This photo was taken in July of 2020, and it shows the tree in midsummer, but with 0 leaves. And our inspector took a close-up photo of the twigs and the buds just to show that they're dead. There's no live buds formed on the tree. And so this one is also replantable. The next tree as part of this agenda item is 1872 Union Street. It's also another Victorian box tree, Pittosporum undulatum, in severe decline. Again, this should be an evergreen with thick, lustrous, vigorous looking, large, waxy green leaves. And as you can see here, I would say more than 95% of the tree is gone due to dead twigs and dead stems. So this tree again is in severe decline. I'm just looking at the utilities in the sidewalk. So to talk about replacement, our code requires that whenever a tree is removed that it be replaced. So that's not a decision that's made lightly. We have a laundry list of utilities and other conflicts we need to make sure are meeting our minimum spacing guidelines between trees and utilities. In this particular case, we need 5 feet of clearance from that first utility to the left of the tree in the foreground. That's the sewer vent. We need at least 5 feet from that, as long as 3 feet from both the water and the gas and or phone and cable lines. So in this particular case, unfortunately, this is a removal without replacement because our planting guidelines cannot be met. And there's no room in this immediate frontage to plant the replacement tree. And so that's something we also look at is if we shifted a few squares, a few sidewalk squares that are approximately 3 by 3, is there room for replacement in that immediate space? And if there is none, then unfortunately we can't replace it at that site. The next location is adjacent to 2360 Fillmore Street. This is a ficus tree that is mostly dead. There might be a few leaves still hanging on there, but you can see the defoliation. The way this tree should appear is the way the other trees appear in the distance to the right. Very green, dark, lustrous, vigorous canopies. And so again, this one is in severe decline. This is a different date, but this shows the very poor union. Just a secondary major issue is this is where trees are failing during wind events or non-wind events is where two stems of equal sizes have very acute narrow angles of attachment. It's a structurally weak point within the tree. Primary reason for posting as a hazard is both the major defoliation here, nearly dead, and this pretty large structural defect. Now this tree, because it's so close to the pole, I don't believe can be replaced. Let's see. Yeah, without replacement. So just to be clear, if you're calling in and you live near 2360 and you're wondering about this, it's not replantable due to the approach to the intersection where we need 25 feet of clearance as you approach it. Again, showing poor attachments in the main structure of the tree and secondary unions as well. That concludes the staff presentation for these individual trees that were part of this agenda item. Again, trees were identified as hazards by our staff, and some are with replacement and some without replacement, as noted on the notification. And that concludes the staff presentation.
Okay, thank you, Chris, for your presentation. If you would like to comment on this item, again, please raise your hand using Zoom's raise your hand feature to put yourself on a queue. If you have dialed in by phone, raise your hand by pressing *9. And when told to mute, we can press the *6 button. Otherwise, if there are no other comments for this item, I will close the item and make my recommendations to the director. Do I see any? There is one raised hand.
Okay, we have Josh. You're allowed, you're able to speak.
Thanks, Soyuz. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and happy Inauguration Day. Just one comment, which is that I don't think there should ever be an order issued where we don't have a replacement tree in a city where we're thousands of trees behind in our 2014 urban forest plan. So in my public comment is that every tree should be replaced, whether that is exactly in the same spot or somewhere else. There's really no reason why we would ever not replace a tree, given what our city has set out to do for our street tree urban canopy. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Josh, for that. Would Urban Forestry like to comment on this comment?
I noted that. This is Chris Bock with Public Works Urban Forestry. I did note that, and it's something that I will forward to our superintendent at Public Works. Basically, it's been our practice to replace the tree directly adjacent to the property or within the next property or two. To replace it somewhere within that block, obviously, would be the next step, and in the community at large. I will run that by our superintendent.
Okay, and we also have John Nolte raising his hand.
Okay.
And you can go ahead and speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Since we have 5 different species here, I was wondering which species would be for the replacement of the different trees since the different species. And secondly, because some of them are near power lines, some of them are near poles, I would assume since these are mature, they all look mature trees, but they're dying, that the replacement be fairly sizable, and also to deal with the character of the street, because I don't hear anything about the replacement of each individual tree, because there's 5 items here. What is the replacement for the 5 different items that's feasible for the site? Thank you very much. And Mike, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, John. Again, does your Urban Forestry have, would you like to respond to that comment?
Sure, this is Chris Buck with Urban Forestry staff. Our Urban Forestry inspector does evaluate the species on the block, and they look at matching species that are nearby. They also look at planting the largest size possible replacement at maturity. So we're always looking to plant replacement species that are based on the available size given. So if it's a really narrow sidewalk, it's likely going to be a small to medium stature tree. If it's a wide sidewalk, we're going to be looking at large stature replacement. But we also look at species on that block, species nearby. So it's definitely something that the urban forestry inspector looks at for each individual case. And then down the road, there'll be some variability depending on availability of those species from the nursery. So those factors are considered, and we will definitely look at planting the largest size species given the conditions of each individual site. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Chris. Looks like there's no other further comments. Okay, if there's no other further comments for this items, I will now close this item and will make my recommendations to the director after later. Let's move on to the next order, order number 204128. May I have Public Work make its presentation on that?
Thank you. Good morning. This is Chris Bock with Bureau of Urban Forestry. And it looks like you already have we have the PowerPoint up front. That's great. So the next item that I'm presenting information for is order 204128. It's the removal within district supervisorial district 4 hazard tree removal. In this case, we have removal of 2 hazard street trees with replacement at the following addresses: 1522 26th Ave and 1466 35th Ave. Staff approved the removals and the public has protested. The first address we'll look at is 1522 26th Avenue. The subject tree is a Blackwood Acacia or Acacia melanoxylon. I got a typo there, Acacia melanoxylon, not a G on the end. This is a species we saw earlier in the presentation. The concerns with this tree in particular are structural failure. And so we have a tree that had very, very poor structural condition because we had multiple stems originating all from one location within the tree's trunk. This likely resulted many, many years ago from a topping cut which also may have even occurred at the nursery before the tree was even planted in the ground. We know a lot more now about the importance of structural pruning and thinning out some of those competing stems so they don't form and develop a structure that's essentially just waiting to fail. So unfortunately, this one was done waiting, and 2 of the large stems have failed. The remaining stems are very weakly attached. They are compromised. There's some decay, not just poor structure, but also some decay and damage within those old unions. So for us, even though this is a relatively smallish tree for acacias, these can get much, much larger. The presence of overhead power lines in this side of the block means that the tree has been topped repeatedly. Sometimes that's required of PG&E. Sometimes it's property owners performing work very poorly or using a contractor who wasn't licensed or qualified to perform tree work. So just a reminder that if you are a property owner and you're looking to do tree work, you really need to call 311. Public Works is now responsible for pruning all of the street trees in San Francisco. The goal is to prevent property owners or unqualified contractors from performing work in the right of way on street trees that are now under our jurisdiction. The long-term goal that we can provide better routine maintenance. So those are some of the issues with this tree. Very poor structure, failures, and the remaining structure is also unstable and a hazard. So we wish to remove that tree. The next tree, the second of the 2, is a little less typical. So this is 1466 35th Avenue. and this is a Canary Island date palm. The Latin name for this is Phoenix canariensis. And these are date palms we have planted up and down Dolores in the center median. We also have them planted along the Embarcadero. Those were planted after the freeway came down. So in this particular case, we have an unusual situation in that a palm tree was planted by the property owner below power lines. The challenge is with a palm tree, the growth of a palm tree is occurring only at the very top. And so I've highlighted in red circle where this epicormic growth occurs. Sorry, not epicormic, it's the meristem tissue that's producing all the new fronds in this tree, and this palm tree is only at the top. And so the challenge we have is, of course, you should never put tall growing palm trees under power lines. And these are secondary power lines that provide electricity to people's homes. And these fronds, when they contact in a major way, make major contact with secondary lines, it creates a fire hazard. I actually learned this the hard way 22 years ago when I used to work for PG&E as a consulting utility forester. We had someone's shed burned down in the backyard after making heavy contact with secondary lines. So there's no way for this tree to grow. The new fronds will grow out up and then laterally and across all three phases of those three lines, creating an electrical hazard. So PG&E by law, directed and mandated by the PUC, is required to maintain those lines. And so while you look at this palm tree and it's atrocious and it looks disgusting, you know, in this case, we're not blaming PG&E. We're not blaming anyone. We are encouraging the public never to plant a tree without a permit, because our staff would have looked up and said, this is not a place to plant a palm tree. So there's no way to mitigate or navigate keeping this palm tree here. The power lines will not be relocated. And so we're stuck with this unfortunate situation. So this is an electrical hazard, and we need to remove this palm tree. It's our liability. And if the tree does contact those lines and become energized, that's a real public safety concern. So again, unusual situation. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time explaining how some of this occurs. The biggest issue we see in the public sometimes is people will plop a queen palm directly in an empty basin adjacent to their home, directly under power lines. This issue took many, many years to get to this point. But at this point in time, now that we have the maintenance responsibility, this is not a condition we wish to see in the public right of way. So there will be a replacement species, but it will need to be a small to medium stature tree that will not max out at a height well above those secondary lines. So this is removal with replacement. And that concludes the staff presentation for these two trees in District 4. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for that presentation. Again, if you would like to comment on this item, please raise your hand using Zoom's raise your hand feature. If you have dialed in by phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. If there are no more comments for this item, I will close this item and make my recommendations to the director. Looks like we have one hand raised.
Yes, I was going to say that.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, this is Joe Nolte. I have some issues with this. Well, a couple issues. One is the pictures that are being presented, like the smoke for the palm tree, is done 6 months ago, and you're considering these trees being hazardous. Hazardous means that they're they have to be removed quickly. So there's a couple prongs here that I want to address. One is that it seems that both of the trees in District 4 are under power lines. So then the replacement trees is going to have to be shorter in stature to stay in those immediate areas because of the power lines that are above them. So they cannot be very big, high trees going back in. Secondly, I'm confused why, if this was done some time ago, nobody in the presentation says when these trees were tagged. How many months, years ago were these noticed, and why are they finally now on the agenda? Because this is now January, and this is a picture of the tree 6 months ago. And it's still there. The next issue would be, since we have all the trees on the agenda are basically are by staff or to be removed, the issue would be, what's the timeline for the removal and replacement? Thank you. All the trees.
Thank you, John, for your comment. Does the Bureau of Urban Forestry like to respond to this comment?
Sure. This is Chris Bock with Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. Regarding the timeline for removal and replacement, that's a great question. So our code requires generally that it requires applicants to replace a tree within 6 months. So our goal here would be to follow the same guideline and replace within 6 months. So we would replace these trees within 6 months of removal. Regarding removal for a hazard tree, once we got through a hearing process like this, I would say we would try to remove it as soon as we can, typically within a few weeks or a month, depending on the wind that we just received in the last couple of days. Events like that can take your plans and your timelines and your schedules and can do what it just did with anything that was light enough to blow around. It's going to impact our ability to do things in a set timeline. That said, we would be removing these within a month typically of getting approval after a hearing process. So I'd say the timeline would be within a month of approval and replacement within 6 months after that. And then just in general, we do have a backlog of a number of trees that were posted for removal that were protested, and we're still digging out from that backlog. So as a staff, as a department, we didn't have hearings for 3 months, and we have a pretty big backlog because a lot of people have protested the removal of hazard trees. So that's a little bit of background on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for your response. Again, if you'd like to comment on it, please raise your hand. Otherwise, if there are no more comments for this item, I will now close this item. It looks like there is not any more comments, so let's close this item. Let's move on to order number 204129. May I have Public Works make its presentation?
Thank you. Good morning. This is Chris Buck with Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry, and it looks like we're still got the presentation up, which is wonderful. So the next item that I'm going to present information for this agenda item, we actually have a single tree. So it's the removal of one hazard tree with replacement adjacent to 1360 Fulton Street. Staff approved the removal and the public protested. So this is a purple leaf plum tree. It's Prunus ceracifera, and its Crowder vesuvius is the cultivar. So, and actually they'll be typically in flower at the end of January, early February. So folks from the public often wonder if they have a flowering plum tree or a flowering cherry. The flowering plums flower right around Super Bowl in that time frame. Flowering cherries typically flower in April to May. And that was kind of relevant information before Google Street View when we could just pull it up and look at it. So a little bit of backstory there on this tree. So Purple leaf plum trees are generally a short-lived species. They aren't a very large stature tree, and after about 20 years, 20 to 30 years, they senesce. Their growing reduces and their vigor reduces. This particular tree has root issues. So essentially, when our inspector looked at this tree, from her notes, actually, she looked at it from a service request last summer and felt like it was okay. And then she came back, this is a year ago, actually. She came back to look at it from another service request. And when she pushed against it the second time, she felt that the strength of the roots was decreasing because she could physically move the tree. So due to that, she then posted the tree for a hazard removal. And here's the photos that she took. It's hard to understand why we're showing these photos, but there is decay and there's a loss of strength within the root zone. Not that you can see that just from staring at a photo, but she did literally put her shoulder into this and she got movement that we wouldn't typically expect. So not surprisingly, it's a plum tree that's in poor condition. It's really reduced vigor quite a bit. And once she could physically move the tree, it was posted with a 15-day notice. There's been a history of sidewalk repair here. The species doesn't really tolerate a lot of sidewalk repair. So several years after that sidewalk repair, species susceptibility to senescence, root decay, and she identified it as a hazard. And again, just to confirm the timeline on this one, her initial inspection was in October of 2019. She returned a year ago. A few months later, in January 2020, she could move the tree and she posted it with a 15-day hazard notice. And again, just to repeat, that was a great question from the public, is that we typically try to replace trees within 6 months. And if these trees are approved, we would try to remove these within a month after approval. This tree is removal with replacement. It'll actually get shifted to the other side of the driveway. So I just wanted to point that out. This replacement tree, because of utilities in the streetlight, will get shifted to the right of this driveway. So we are really looking at replacing trees where we can, when we have a nearby replacement location. Thank you. That concludes the staff presentation for this one item.
Okay, thank you again, Chris, for your presentation. If there are any comments, which there is a couple, raise your hand and then we will cue you to speak. Oh, there's 3. All right.
Okay, we will hear from Lance Carnes. Go ahead.
I think Lance is muted right now.
Yes, I sent him a note to unmute.
Okay.
There you go.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we
I
can.
wonder if I could do a share from my end here. Screen share.
Okay, just a moment then, and I will promote you to panelist. Okay, you should be able to now.
Yeah, I think he just needs to unmute and then he can
I did.
share.
I sent him a request to
Okay.
unmute. Mhm. Lance, can you hear us? Lance, are you able to hear us? You should be
There he
able
is.
to share your screen now. There you go.
You're on mute, Lance. We hear you now. We can
Yes.
This
hear
will
you.
stop other screen sharing.
There should be a green button that says share screen.
I did that.
Okay.
And then I stopped my share screen just to make sure that wouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, that should be okay if you
Okay.
push.
Should I click the green button again? Share
Yes.
screen? Okay. Okay. Are we all
Yes.
hooked up here?
It's beginning now.
You
Yes.
got voice and you got my
Yes, it's there.
video? Ah, cool. Okay. Thank you for bearing with me on that. My name's Lance Carnes, and I prepared a bunch of slides for this presentation. So if you want to review them, they're out at savesftrees.org. And then let me go ahead here. Damn, how do I advance my screen now? Let's see.
Okay, and I will begin the timer once
If you
you're
could
ready.
just,
When you're ready.
yeah, here we
We'll
go.
have-
Okay.
Okay, so you'll have 3 minutes.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Mhm.
Okay. So the 1360 Fulton Street was, I don't usually read things very carefully, but this one really caught my attention because it was not posted correctly for removal 1 year ago. The backup documentation was added only just last week, over 1 year late. And a photograph added to the online file last week showed that the tree had already been removed. I don't know if you folks are aware of that or not. So not correctly posted. So the public works code says that if you're going to remove a tree, you have to give all interested parties a notice of the fact, and also 30 days prior, you put a notice on the affected tree. So a paper removal notice apparently exists, but there's no photographic evidence that it was posted on the affected tree, as is normally provided by Buff. And a notice of the tree's removal was not posted on the online tree removal notifications website. I keep an archive of all postings on the website, and you can see down here that on January 13th of 2020, there is no indication. There's another tree that was posted on the 9th, which is 1 day after the subject tree. The subject tree would have appeared somewhere in here. It did not appear on the website. And I do have HTML if there's a quibble about my archive. Here's the posting notice here on the left. And you'll see that, let's see if let me go back one here. And you can see that it was uploaded to the website on January 12th, 2021, which I believe was last Tuesday or Wednesday. 1 year late. Normally these things appear right away. And on the right is another picture of the tree as it was back in 2019. The tree has already been removed. So contrary to Mr. Buck's photograph, here's the basin in front of the property. It's empty. So what's the remedy
You have 30
here?
seconds.
What's the remedy? Since the tree's already been removed, what can the hearing officer do? I'd like a full explanation from Bob as to what happened. And there's 4 items here. You can go to my website, pick up the list of items. And I want to know how Buff will make sure this does not happen again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lance, for your comment. Yes, Urban Forestry, would you like to comment on his question?
Thank you. This is Chris Bock with Bureau of Urban Forestry. The mute button moves around sometimes, as we're all discovering. Yeah, we will definitely look into that. we'll respond to those points that are brought up by Mr. Carnes. I think largely what I'll need to do is look into that and provide you as a hearing officer the specific responses to those. My initial reaction, and you have to understand, especially after the wind we had in the last couple of days, why a hazard tree that's been posted as a hazard tree is gone a year later. That's probably going to be because it fell over. So if we're trying to connect the dots, we'll go ahead and look at that. So I appreciate Mr. Carnes' attention on that one. I do want to gently point out that because there's no photo of a posting in our database doesn't mean that the tree was not posted. So I also want to point that out as well. It requires no research for me to tell you that you're not seeing a photo of the posting, and to say that it was illegal and not done properly is jumping to conclusions. So I appreciate the feedback, and for sure we'll provide you as a hearing officer the information about that. But again, my bet's on a hazard tree posted for over a year, likely having fallen in that time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. I think there's a couple more.
We have Josh Clip. Josh, you can go ahead and speak.
Thanks, Therese. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. I know that Lance works really hard to keep fastidious documentation and data on as much as he can regarding our urban canopy. And I think it's really important because the city does not generally, and I'm not saying Public Works specifically, but what I'm saying is the city writ large does not generally keep very good data itself, which is a real source of personal pain. I wish that it did so much better around that. So I want to just acknowledge how much Lance does to try to keep tabs on everything. And I think it's an interesting issue that this points out, previously raised by John, the amount of time that can be between the time something's posted and something comes down. And here we've got, I think, as I hear Chris saying, a tree that's been posted for a year and now it's disappeared. And so it's just, as a member of the public, it's just hard to understand how something is posted as a hazard tree. It sits around for a year. And then by the time we get to a hearing, and by the way, in 2020, we had more hearings for tree removals than we had in the previous year. And now we're going to have 3 just this month. So, I think we've more than caught up to what was sort of standard practice for tree removal hearings. But it's just hard to understand, just as an interested member of the public, the processes and the record keeping and trees disappearing by the time we get to a hearing, regardless of the condition they were in when they were posted. That's all. It's just a comment. I don't have questions.
Thank you very much, Josh, for your comments. Again, if Bureau of Urban Forestry would like to comment on that, you may.
That's Chris Bock with Public Works. No, those are really great points, and we do appreciate Mr. Carnes' advocacy. So we'll take a close look at that as well, and we are actively figuring out how we can catch up on the a lot of these trees that we have not had hearings for yet. So we appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, we have Mr. Nolte. Mr. Nolte, you can go ahead and speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. A couple of issues. One, part of Chris Buck's presentation, they said they were going to remove the tree and plant it on the other side of the driveway. The picture that was shown by Lance shows that the plot is empty, but also is not leveled with the street. So that's a hazard right now as the plot stays empty and it's not leveled with the street sidewalk around it. next, the issue is that when the tree was there, I was looking at it at a different perspective, that it was leading into the driveway and probably causing the person who, the property owner, getting in and out of his garage, if he had a car or a large car, the clearance. So what is the clearance of, because it was looked like it was leaning into the driveway. And so then my next question would be the replacement tree. How do we make sure that the replacement tree that's going to go on the other side of the driveway is not going to lean to the other direction back into the driveway? You know, can we have some guarantees there that the property owner does not have to be concerned about the leaning of the new tree into the driveway? Thank you very much. I'm finished.
Thank you, John. Sorry, I'm taking notes, so please excuse some of the delay. Would Bureau of Urban Forestry like to comment on that?
No, we're all set. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that is it. So again, if you would like to comment, please raise your hand. Otherwise, if there are no more comments on this item, I will now close the item and make recommendations later. Okay, we have order number 204130. May I have Public Works make its presentation?
Thank you. This is Chris Bock with Bureau of Urban Forestry staff. And let me increase this to slideshow view. Oh, hold on, let me scan. Get back down to the current item. One moment. Thanks for your patience. Here we go. From current slide. Thank you. We just covered 1360 Fulton. So the next item, 204130, removal of 4 hazard street trees at the following addresses. So there's 2 primary addresses. One is 46 Cragmont Avenue, and then we're going to jump over to 80 Juniperocera Boulevard. So at 46 Cragmont Avenue, we have a eucalyptus. It's silver dollar eucalyptus. It has more circular leaves, so we call it silver dollar eucalyptus, Eucalyptus polyanthemus. This tree health is in severe decline. So this is a canopy that should really be full. And this image really kind of captures the level of decline we're seeing within this tree, not just one branch, you know, off to the side, but a lot of dead branches throughout the entire canopy. And so that's what our inspector found when she was evaluating this tree's condition. I also noticed in her photos, but they were hard to pick out in her photos. So using just Google Street View, which is amazing, has great optics, I want to just highlight some of the structural issues with this tree, and just again emphasize how bad topping, what it does to trees long term. So these are actually all the old topping cuts from many years ago, and showing these 2 in particular. After you top a tree, it sprouts out in a stress response, and all those stems compete, and eventually a couple of them will exist, the others sort of. So we have these points of attachment that are really weak and prone to fail. So when you have 2 stems of equal sizes joining, even with a wide angle of attachment, it's still a failure potential that's greater at failure than if there were not 2 limbs of the same size competing in the same location. On the left, you can see an even worse condition, which is when they join and there's just no daylight between them. You can imagine, you know, cracking a wishbone. You just pull on those and they're going to separate really easily. So this is the condition of the tree, is both the dieback throughout the upper canopy and some of the injuries from the old topping cuts. And this is literally where the tree was cut many years ago. And we explain that to the public when we issue fines and property owners come out and say, but the tree looks fine. It's growing right back. We explain that the damage is not, we're not going to feel those repercussions for a long time to come. So in this particular case, it's removal without replacement because we don't have the required 4-foot path of travel, and we're not close to getting that on this block, on this street right here. So we have these sort of walls within the right of way as they go right up to the edge of the sidewalk, and just not enough room to plan a replacement. You can see in this neighborhood, the land use pattern is to have kind of vegetation and trees and plants in the setback behind the curb, and not within the curb. Sorry, not within the sidewalk. So this one, unfortunately, the tree is in severe decline. We've had eucalyptus trees fail with this amount of canopy dieback because of root loss. So root decay is one indicator of major defoliation like this. And so we have concerns that this tree may fail. Moving on to the next site is 80 Juniperocera Boulevard. So this is the main part of what we call JS Boulevard. There's also a side street on the left, which confusingly enough is also called JS Boulevard. So the homes closest to these trees are labeled 80 Juniperocera Boulevard. They're to the left in this image or to the west directionally. So this is a Siberian elm tree, and the city only pollards certain species of trees. These trees were pollarded and then allowed to grow back out again over the years. But these Siberian elms are experiencing a lot of large stem failures from where decay is set into the main stems and trunk of the tree. And additionally, some of these sections of the tree are dead. This photo was taken when it was in its deciduous state, so it's not entirely dead, but we have a lot of structural issues and decay present. That's also the same situation with the next tree, which is tree number 8. And we count these trees off for folks watching with the numbering. We go with the flow of traffic on that side of the street so that when we number them, the tree crew could follow on their own clipboard the numbering that they're likely to encounter unless it's a one-way street. So in this case, this is site number 8. And again, this tree, there's very little live canopy to it. Old topping cuts, decay in those old unions, and branch failures. And then the third tree of the 3 is tree number 10. This one, same conditions as the other 2, large branch failures, decay in the old topping, pruning cuts, pollarding cuts, and then just very little live canopy throughout the crown of the tree. These can be replaced. So there is room to plant replacement trees here along this sidewalk area. So the trees we've looked at along JS here are removal with replacement. And that concludes our staff presentation for these items on this agenda. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chris, for your presentation. Looks like we have at least one person raising their hand to comment, or 2.
Yes, we have Lance Carnes. Go ahead, Mr. Carnes.
You hear me okay?
Yes.
I'd like to share my screen again too.
Okay, just one moment. Okay. Okay, go ahead. You should be able to, well, let me see. Yeah. And unmute yourself, please, and then you can go ahead and share your screen. And also unmute yourself, please.
Okay. So I'm starting to catch on as soon as you share it, unmutes you. Anyway,
Okay.
okay, let me go on to the next item here. Okay, so this is 80 Juniperocera Boulevard. And when this was posted, gosh, it must have been quite a while ago, early 2020. I actually wrote to the inspector. It wasn't the inspector of record. It was another fella. And I said, so where the heck are these trees? Because he indicated, here's a little map here, Google map. You see Juniperocera Boulevard, and there's a red thing. And apparently that's roughly where these trees are located. I, being kind of a stickler, I went into the DPW database, looked up 80 Juniperocera, and had it plot the points. And here they are down here, about, I don't know, about a quarter mile away. So my question is not anything about the condition of the trees. They probably should be removed. But I'm really concerned that they remove the right trees. If the tree removal crew goes by the database, they're going to cut down some trees that may not be the ones you want. I think that in general, I'd like to see inspectors in the department use the tree database. You have a good tree database out there with GPS points and the whole deal. And I find that a lot of inspectors just kind of look over their shoulder, find the nearest address, and write that down as being the location. Looking over your shoulder at an address is not the same as the address that's in the database. So that's just a caveat to the department. Please use your data. You also have another database you can use called the Citywide Survey, which has the trees at the same location. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lance. Again, if Buff would like to comment on this, they can right now. Otherwise, I will close this. Oh, wait, actually, there's two more panelists, but will Buff like to comment on this item?
Sure. Hi, this is Chris Bock with Bureau of Urban Forestry. And for sure, if the member of the public speaking with an inspector who's not the inspector of note for that file, the inspector who inspected will know exactly all the information and where those trees are located. So that's generally who we would have respond to inquiries. We use 80 JS Boulevard because for the public walking by, walking their dog, that's an address that will mean something to them physically on site. So that's where we're going. But I appreciate the feedback, and we do also our tree database. Our crews are given a list of the specific tree IDs. So we do use our database, and we refer them to the correct tree ID asset that's required whenever we give them a removal request. And that includes images of the subject tree to make sure that no issues occur out there. So thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, we have Josh Clipp. Mr. Clipp, you can go ahead and speak.
Thanks, Reese. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, okay, so it sounds like there's maybe a disconnect between what's posted on the notice and what's maintained in the database through the street tree census, I think is what Lance is referring to and Chris is referring to. So I guess I would just second the sentiment that, for Public Works to ensure that the right information is communicated to what are typically contractors out there doing this work who would rely on that information to make sure that they're taking down the right tree. And then the only other thing I would say is I would again reiterate that there's really no reason why any order for removal should say that the tree would not be replaced. Again, there are tens of thousands of empty basins around the city and a failed urban forest plan to plant it says 50,000. I think maybe it's 40,000 by now, since that number's been adjusted, trees by 2034. We're pretty far behind on that. So until we've met that goal, there really should be no order saying that a tree won't be replaced. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Josh, for that comment. Again, if Bureau of Urban Forestry would like to comment on it, feel free to do so. If not, we can go to the next question.
Thank you, Chris Bock with Public Works. Yeah, we've been talking about policy-wise, how to replace trees when they're not replantable in that immediate location. I think the way the average person interacts with our bureau by looking out their window and seeing a notice on a tree. And if we were to say, yes, it's being replaced, but it's being replaced 3 blocks away and not in front of my daughter's window, I would not call that a replacement. So as we look at sort of the big policy, but I understand Mr. Clipp's point, the bigger picture policy is we should always replace a tree. That's absolutely right. Now we have an urban forest plan, so trees that are planted throughout the year in different districts, okay, so some of those are replacement trees, some of those are new trees. But just the logistics of us saying to someone in front of their own home that it will be replaced and it's not going to be within a few blocks of their window, that's just one hurdle, but I get it. The bigger picture here is policy-wise, and we'll continue to absolutely look at that. But that's, the purpose of our posting is to serve the immediate community on that block and how they interact with our process. But for absolutely sure, I'm just pointing that out. It's something I forgot to mention logistically about that. And we could say that it's easy enough to just add a sentence and say, this site, no, unfortunately we have conflicts, but big picture, we promise it'll be replaced. Not a bad way to go. And I think it would send a nice message to the public. So I take that to heart, and we'll see what we can do on that point. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we have John Nolte. And go ahead, Mr. Nolte, you can speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I have some issues, again, that were brought up, at least 3 or even more databases that the Bureau of Urban Forestry and DPW have on trees. And when they put an X in it and some other things that they do when they're trying to say this is where the tree's at, it does become perplexing to the public when you have an X or something else, because in this case, this is sort of like in the medium, because it's not in front of the property, because it's between 2 streets where these trees are located. And so it's hard to locate these trees when the average person is trying to find out where these trees are located. And then it gets more perplexed when you have databases that change the address of the location of these trees. And I could see what has been raised is having a contractor given an address and also the map that Lance showed where the trees are versus where they are proposed being. So I do have a concern about, is the actual correct tree being taken out, because you're hiring a third party to take out some of these trees. So that is a big concern to the San Francisco residents in general, and also hearing that possibly when removal of a tree that Chris Buck just said about it not being placed in the immediate area and it's 3 blocks away. Well, I don't think you have to go 3 blocks that you cannot find an appropriate space within a block to plant a tree, unless there's a real problem with the sidewalks or something on the location of that tree being removed. That's my end of my public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for your comments. Would Bureau of Urban Forestry like to comment on that?
Sure, this is Chris Bock again with Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. Again, going back to Mr. Karn's comment about there being a disconnect with something that he sees in the database. He's not an employee of the city and county of San Francisco. We respect his feedback. We're going to look into it, but he's putting forth a narrative that there was a disconnect. And now we have additional members of the public now echoing another disconnect, and then a third member of the public. And so to me, this is eroding public confidence in the ability of us to do our job. It's a simple inquiry. Like, Lance has a question about how we list a tree in a database, but now we're concerned about someone moving up and removing the wrong tree. I worry about that narrative because that's obviously damaging, and we will look into the specific issue that Mr. Karn's identified, but just hearing repeatedly now from 3 people that it's a disconnect, I'd like folks to wait for the resulting decision when we can address that, and then they can wait to see if there's a disconnect. That said, I hear the feedback, and I can assure Mr. Nolte that we're not sending contractors out, having them, as Mr. Karn said, just sort of looking over their shoulders. That's not how it's done. I can assure the public that's not how it's done. And I can also assure the public that there are challenges to connecting a tree to a site. So we spend a lot of time doing that. Our team is committed to locating all this information within the database. And if you're trying to look at it from home, it can be confusing. It's totally understandable to have questions, but we're going to do our best to convince the public that there's not a disconnect between the tree that's posted with a notice and the tree that's removed. I just want to assure you that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris, for your comments. Looks like there's no other comments from anyone else. So I will like to close this item and move on to the next order. Order number 204131. May I have Public Work makes its presentation.
Good morning, Chris Bock with Bureau of Urban Forestry. We'll get this screen shared in a moment. And current slide. So yes, the next item is regarding the hazard removal of 2 trees within District 8, 214 Roanoke Street and 458 Alvarado Street. And staff has approved the removal and the public has protested. And this is removal with replacement. This first site is a really small tree. It's a peppermint willow, and it was planted 7 years ago, and it's not established well. So on the far right, the inspector who helped pull together the presentation for me showed an image of what a healthy one would look like on the far right. This tree is really getting hammered by the wind. It looks like it's kind of bent over. But this is the tree. It's not dead, but it's clearly not establishing. And our inspector posted the removal notice on that tree. And again, it's adjacent to 214 Roanoke. We just want to go ahead and remove and replace this tree. And I also, just a note that the property owner in this particular case brought it to our attention and is committed to watering and getting that replacement tree established. The next site is 458 Alvarado, and this is another purple leaf plum tree. We talked about another one earlier in the hearing. So again, it's a really popular tree that was planted a lot in the 1980s, in the early 90s. And by the late 1990s, we knew we had way too many people requesting these across the city. So the issue with this particular tree is that there are injuries and decay present. So there's a major amount of decay present below the union of the two main stems. And so this is an area within the structure of the tree that's very prone to fail. When wood is decayed, that portion of the wood that's decayed has no strength holding capacity. And wood, as we know, it is very strong and holds up buildings. But if the wood is decayed, there's zero strength holding capacity. So the big question is how much existing wood that's not decayed, how much is required to continue to hold the tree up? And that can vary species by species. But this is a very deep cavity, a lot of decay below the union of the two main stems. So we're concerned that this is where the tree would fail. And when we have wind events and we go scoop up fallen trees and branches, we see as arborists, where trees break. It's rare that it's just in the middle of a healthy stem. It's typically where main unions occur. So this is, again, the tree adjacent to 458 Alvarado. And for both of these items, 214 Roanoke, 458 Alvarado, both trees can be replaced. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris, for your presentation. Looks like we have one raised hand right now. So.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Carnes, you can speak.
Yeah, I don't need to share this time. I can just speak. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. So I heard Mr. Bock say in passing that the tree at 214 Roanoke Street, number 1, the neighbors are going to help water it when it's replaced. I've seen this pop up several times recently, where the replacement tree is, in fact, they've gone out and asked people who are not obligated to water the tree to water the trees. I'm concerned, is Bureau of Urban Forestry broke? Do you have enough money to actually replace these trees correctly? It sounds like we're sort of passing the cup, to raise enough money to replace a tree. So I wonder if you could comment on your budget for replacing trees, please.
Would Bureau of Urban Forestry like to comment on this?
Sure, it's a reasonable question for sure. This is Chris Bock with Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. So whenever we do have eager property owners who are willing and able and ready to water street trees, we do typically take them up on that offer. Street trees were managed by many property owners over the years with guidance from Friends of the Urban Forest, and they've actually, anecdotally, have planted hundreds of, many thousands of street trees across the city and got them established successfully. So regarding the budget, we, what I can commit to is we have the budget to plant replacement trees for these locations on this evening's hearing, this morning's hearing. But yes, the budget issues for municipalities across the country are definitely going to be in dire straits. The good news is our budget for maintenance is not in question. The challenge is that politically, replacement trees weren't considered part of the maintenance. And so we do have a shortage of funding for planting trees. So our preference is to water trees ourselves. But when we do have a property owner who's willing to water, we do take them up on that offer. So that's a little bit of comment about that. But there's a lot more information about our budget at our Urban Forestry Council meetings in the annual report that was recently circulating there at the council. And I'm sure there'll be a lot more information available from Public Works as we all stare at these budgets and the cuts that I'm sure we know are coming. But we can commit to planting replacements for the trees that were proposed for removal at this hearing. And if we do have an eager property owner, we'll take them up on that offer. And of course, monitor how they're doing with that. If we see that they're not delivering enough water, we may have to take that gesture away from them and put it back on our water list. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris, for comments. I guess our next question.
We have Josh Clip. And go ahead, Mr. Clip, you can speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, just a few comments. First, I noticed from the photos that this tree was planted by Friends of the Urban Forest. And 7 years ago, as somebody who has been a volunteer planting leader with Friends of the Urban Forest for 11 years, it's very likely that I either planted that tree or was on the team that did, and how disheartening it is to see what I know, the work that went into putting that tree in the ground, and to see just only 7 years later, to see that thing standing there dead and battered like that is incredibly disheartening. And I would also say that it underscores the importance of preserving trees that do actually make it to establishment. From a more practical perspective, I have two comments. One is, peppermint willows don't tend to do very well in very windy areas because they're willows. They kind of move around pretty easily. So it's sort of, I think, I don't know where that failure of tree selection happened, but I would like to not see that happen again. And secondly, in terms of who's going to take care of the new tree, I see there's a for sale sign here. So is it the property owner? Is it the neighbors? Who's agreeing to it, and how are we going to hold them accountable for it, especially if it is the neighbors? And, are they going to, how is this going to work? Because usually when you've got a property owner watering their own tree, they just pull a hose out of their garage. And so here you're talking about some increased logistics. And so if there's any more information about how anyone actually plans on doing that, I would really like to hear that. So again, species and care are my two questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Josh, for your comments. Would the Bureau of Urban Forestry like to comment on that?
Sure. This is Chris Bock with Public Works. Those are totally legitimate observations, and we're going to confirm. I saw the for sale sign myself, but I did reach out to our inspector and said the same thing. Like, what's the story here? Because change of hands and property raises a lot of red flags, especially if it's the owner's moving. So I'll confirm, instead of speculating, let me just confirm what that information is. And I think we should commit to putting that in the resulting decision, is confirmation that the commitment for watering has been vetted. We'll do that. And then also noting the species. Again, if it's a species thing where it did not establish properly, or if it was a failure to water regularly those first 3 years, we'll take a look at that as well, to make sure that it's not repeated at the same time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris, for your comments. Looks like there's another public comment.
Yes, John Nolte. Okay, you can go ahead, Mr. Nolte.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, great. Couple issues with this first tree on Monac. I see it's under power line, so obviously you're going to have a smaller tree put in there because you don't want to hit those power lines above it. Next issue would be the watering. My issue is with watering because I know Firth does it when they plant trees, and I've seen Burke do the same thing when they plant trees. They put the green bag out. The question now is, if you were to use the green bag to the side of the planting, which is a standard practice now in San Francisco, who puts the water back in? Can the property owner do that? I mean, it really depends how it's planted and how do you refill those green bags, and how long does it take for a green bag to use up all? If you fill up the bag, how long does it usually take for the bag to empty? And so, like, what is the process of using the green bag? How long of time frame is it? Every month, every 2 weeks? How long is for that water last in the green bag? Secondly, is the second tree in District that tree has a Band-Aid around it, sort of a thing, you know, the white strip. And I'm curious to know, because I mean, I've never really seen any DPW going to the extreme of helping a tree. So I would assume that that white holding it together is probably done by the property owner, because I normally don't see DPW doing anything like that to for any tree, because I mean it seems an extra step to keep that tree from falling apart, because he said the wood is dying underneath. So I'm questioning who did that. Thank you. That's the end of my comment.
Thank you, John, for your comments. Would the Bureau of Urban Forestry like to respond to that?
Sure. Good morning. This is Chris Bock with Urban Forestry. It does look like in this case the property owner did that. I don't have an image of the top strap, but it looks like we've seen a lot of different things like that. Call it wishful thinking, call it just wanting to see the tree stay forever. So yeah, I think in this case it was the property owner that placed that in there. And generally, yeah, we don't typically install cables or straps. The industry, there's some who practice that. You often see it more on private property trees. There's some, whether it's fair or not, there's some thought that is installing supports some kind of acknowledgement that there's significant defects within the tree. Generally, we don't typically install supports within the public right of way, but sometimes, who knows, maybe it'll happen in the future. But yeah, so in this case, just looking at these images, it does appear the property owner did put some kind of straps and things on the tree. They've got some Halloween stuff on there, so it's hard to know what's going on with that, but it's not something that staff did. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris, for your response. Is there any other comments from new attendees? If not, I'd like to close this item and continue on to the next order. Order number 204132. May I have Public Work make its presentation?
Good morning. This is Chris Buck with Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. And again, I just keep repeating my name and who I'm representing for the benefit of the public who may be joining the hearing at various points. So I apologize for everyone who's been with us from the get-go, but it's what we do. So this subject tree is adjacent to 3915 Folsom Street, and it's actually a school site. And so numbered on the block, we have tree or tree sites number 4 and 5 in this particular case. This is tree number 4. It's a privet tree, Ligustrum lucidum. It's a broadleaf evergreen tree, but in these images you can see the tree has had a rough life, and as some folks have commented, it does show you how important it is to protect the existing mature trees that we have. We don't want to just swap them out at the first sign of trouble, but this one does have significant injuries. It's been this way for a long time, and through Street Tree SF and now going through and systematically evaluating trees citywide, instead of just letting this sit here like this, we want to go ahead and remove it and replace it with a tree that can be planted and protected and established. So that's the issue. There's trunk issues here. This might have been a lateral branch, and when the main stem was snapped off, the side branch tried to assume the new role of the main leader, and that's what's formed this kind of acute angle in the trunk. Small tree, but we need to remove it and replace it with something that will be here long term. The second tree is right after it on the block, so we identified as tree number 5. Again, it's another privet tree. This is a broadleaf evergreen species that should just be thick and lustrous. You can see some dark patches of the canopy. That's the way the entire canopy should look. So it's in severe decline. I can see there's old sidewalk cement here. What that means is that this tree the roots cause sidewalk damage, which in and of itself is not a reason to remove a tree unless we think it would destabilize in that process. So we always remove and replace the sidewalk when we can, as long as we believe it won't destabilize the tree. I do think that's one of the benefits of Street Tree SF is there were a lot of times over the years where the public wouldn't want to keep replacing sidewalk because of the costs involved. And I think it's a great benefit of Street Tree SF citywide is that the city has the funding to replace sidewalk and repair it and judiciously prune roots to keep the tree. That said, there are times when we make those root pruning cuts and the tree may not receive that treatment well and may decline. And so it looks to me like that was likely the case here, looking at the older concrete in the distance and the fresh concrete directly adjacent to the subject tree. So this tree is in severe decline. And again, when a tree is showing signs of decline within the canopy, one of the concerns, the main concern is having a root failure and having the tree fall over. And so that's why it was identified as a hazard. I believe those are the only two trees we had in this item. So relatively straightforward, the removal of two trees here. It looks like it's adjacent to a school, and we'd like to replace these with replacement species. And these would be watered by city staff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris, for your presentation. We have a couple of comments. Let's go ahead with those.
Okay, we have Lance Carnes. Go ahead, Mr. Carnes.
So I unmuted myself. I also want to share my screen, so I guess I'll have to
Okay, just one
do
moment.
that and then unmute again. So
Just one moment, I will promote you.
I'm finally catching on here.
And then unmute yourself, please.
Okay, let me just move on a little bit to the correct slide. So, all right, so let me get rid of this. Okay, sorry about that. Close up there. So 3915 Folsom number 4, I think is the first one. Yeah. So in 2017, taxpayers spent $500,000 to provide DPW with a citywide tree survey. And part of that was to rate the condition of the trees. Wasn't exact, but it was, something to go by. This tree was rated priority 2 removal, which means not really worth saving. And my question is, why is it still in place 3 years later? The reason I ask that is, if this unfortunate tree were removed and replaced 3 years ago, we could have enjoyed a new healthy tree during that time. The inspector for this tree noted in January 2020, that was a year ago, said adjacent to middle school, significant trunk rot at location of tension, failure is imminent. Adjacent to middle school and failure is imminent. And it's still standing 1 year later. I just don't understand that. I just, again, caution Bock to please use the information in the citywide survey and in your own tree database to better manage SF street trees. Almost exact same thing with tree number 5. It was rated priority 1 removal, not worth saving. In the $500,000 citywide tree survey. Why is it still in place 3 years later? And if it had been removed and replaced 3 years ago, we could have enjoyed a new healthy tree during that time. The inspector noted in January 2020, quote, rotting trunk and 60% dead canopy, trees adjacent to middle school. Why wasn't this tree removed a year ago? If I had a kid in that middle school and the tree fell on him, I'd be all over you guys. And it's on record here that you knew about it, but did nothing. So notice to DPW buff, please use the information in the citywide survey and in your own tree database to better manage SF's street trees. That's the end of my comments.
Thank you, Lance, for your comments. Would Bureau of Urban Forestry like to comment on this?
Sure. Good morning. This is Chris Bock with Urban Forestry staff. Yeah, we agree with Mr. Karn's concerns, and there's a couple things that I wanted to point out. For sure, we're using the citywide census. That's everything that we're basing our strategic and systematic maintenance of street trees on is the survey. So everything we're doing is based on that. So despite the priority 2, and the reason why this tree still stands, one is it's much smaller than the trees we've been removing since Prop E started and became effective on January 1st of 2017. So that is something we're trying to do. If it was a much larger tree, that tree would have been removed by now. And then the other thing is, unfortunately, we did get in a backlog. We had 2 things occur. We had COVID slowdowns with our hearing processes. We also had a member of the public who hasn't spoken in any of the cases here before us this morning, who publicly, meaning in public records, stated that he was going to protest simply any tree we proposed for removal. And I think he was frustrated with the city's inability to plant more replacement trees. I actually, to some degree, agree with that sentiment, absolutely. But he called his efforts Operation Logjam, which I think he thought was tongue-in-cheek. But there's actually very serious ramifications when someone thinks it's funny to protest every single proposed tree removal in the city. The reason we haven't removed it is we can't. We needed to have a hearing for it. So it was protested. So that's the literal reason. It was protested. And as we deal with our backlog of 15-day notices that were protested, we moved forward with trees that were much larger and posed a far greater safety risk. And now we're finally getting to some of these smaller ones. But we absolutely agree with Mr. Karns. But we want to also reiterate that we are using the street tree census, and that's really what our whole Street Tree SF program is based on. So I appreciate that. And we're getting there in terms of getting these 15-day hazards off the books. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for your comment. We have additional comments from members of the public.
Okay, we have Josh Clip. Go ahead, Mr. Clip.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
The first thing I want to do is just actually, I think Chris, you forgot to mention to Mr. Nolte regarding his questions on watering bags. So John, just so you know, those are 20-gallon bags that are filled typically with a hose attachment, and they need to be filled once a week for 3 years to give the tree the best chance at establishment. And then the other comment I'd like to make is that is regarding the timing on replacement. So Chris's presentation, and specifically the trees being next to a school, reminded me of a school not too far from my my house on 20th Street. And there were, I believe, 3 of 4 trees on the one block that were removed, and it's been well over a year, and the basins are they're still empty. And so I guess I'm wondering, is there any, what's the urgency here? What is the timing of proposed replacements? And again, just sort of thinking, and Chris, maybe I'll reach out to you about this separately, but I'm just, those were trees that were on 20th Street that were removed next to a school by Public Works, by the city. and the basins are just sitting there. There doesn't look to be any action or any movement toward replacing those anytime soon. So I'm wondering about that in this context, and I suppose maybe separately the other. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cliff, for your comments. Would the Bureau of Urban Forestry like to respond to that comment?
Sure, Chris with Urban Forestry staff, and thank you for reminding me. Mr. Nolte had commented about the watering bag process, and there's also, we even refer the public, Friends of Urban Forest is a really great section about watering trees with some visuals to show how it can be done with the watering bag or without. It can definitely be done without the watering bag as well. So thank you for that. And then just to confirm, we do need to prioritize replacement trees adjacent to school sites, as one that would have greater foot traffic for sure. So definitely let's connect on those sites on 20th Street and make sure that, those don't linger much longer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for your comment. We have a couple more comments here, I guess.
We have one more, and that is John Nolte.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Nolte.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Couple of issues. One, I noticed again that these trees are under power lines, so I would assume a small stature tree would go in. Secondly, it says it's next to a school. I don't know why can't somehow the DPW or borough partner with the school to water the trees, or to put it into the curriculum or something to help with the students learn how to deal with trees, because at some point students will be going back to school in San Francisco, and so and that might be in your timeline of 6 months out, because that's what everybody's saying, COVID and so forth. In about 6 months we're going to be in the herd thing, and so and school should be back. So I would try to start connecting these dots, especially at schools, with since this is a part of their property, the students be involved in maintaining these trees in some way. Thank you. Finished.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Nolte, for your comments. Would the Bureau of Urban Forestry like to respond to that comment?
Sure, I'll keep it brief. This is Chris Bock again with Urban Forestry staff. It's a really good point. Schools generally are notoriously underfunded for doing much in terms of maintenance in the sidewalks. So each school is almost like its own planet with its own kind of universe of different parent volunteers, some teachers that are, kind of go above and beyond. So at different schools, there are those relationships, and some of them, they don't remain empty long because they have just what you're describing, Mr. Nolte, a really engaged program to take that street tree opportunity as such a great, opportunity to engage students in literally helping craft the environment around them. So we do keep that in mind, and we definitely, there are some schools that are really on that, and then others that really rely on city departments to do what they need to do. So it's something we keep in mind, and for sure, what we need to make sure, I think citywide, is that all schools are getting a base level of care and the commitment, so that those that don't have those resources or connections in the community don't sit vacant. And with that said, I live in the Bayview, and Friends of Urban Forest is going to plant some street trees around one of the schools, right around the block from where I live. So we definitely look at those as high priority sites. And the goal would be that someday the schools somehow engage in experiential learning. That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comment, Chris. There's no other comments from other members of the public. I would like to close this case and move on to the next item. We have order number 204133. May I have Public Work make its presentation?
Thank you. This is Chris Bock with Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry, and I'm just going to pull the presentation back up for a moment. Let's see. Thanks for your patience. From current slide, and we should be back to the PowerPoint. So this item is regarding the removal of 4 hazard trees, and we have trees located adjacent to 1119 Rhode Island Street, 551 Utah Street. We have 2 trees, and then 900X Carolina Street. And we can touch base on that X part of this again in a second. So the first tree is a camphor tree. It's Cinnamomum camphora. It's kind of interesting, but the branch tips are almost greenish, and the branch tips photosynthesize just like the leaves, which is pretty unique. In this particular case, our inspector evaluated the condition of this tree and the decline in the canopy. There's dead sections on the top, not throughout the canopy, but dead sections on top. And our concern here is potential root failure. But in addition to that, this particular tree, there's extensive decay within the base of the tree's trunk. And so here's, if you can look at that, you can see there's missing bark, and then you can really see into the layers of the wood that is decomposed or decayed. So we have an extensive amount of root decay and trunk decay at the base of the tree. We call the base of the tree the root crown. So to see this amount of decay within the root crown of the tree, there's also been sidewalk repair. You can see many of the sidewalk squares are a lighter color than the surrounding sidewalk. That's a sign that sidewalk has been repaired in the past, and it's also damaging the sidewalk again. I think just to point out, when we have opportunities like this to expand and increase the size of the tree's basin, that's something that we typically do. I don't know the exact constraints here. I see a curb and driveway to one side, but to me, it looks like we probably could have had a much larger basin expansion here. And again, I'm not sure who made those repairs before. It might have been the property owner, but that's a process where we would have allowed the sidewalk to be left open all the way to the curb to accommodate more of those tree roots. Now that said, there's clearly been an injury to this tree many years ago. And so that decay took a long time to spread, but we're concerned with the amount of decay present in this tree and that it poses a hazard. This is another view of the canopy, the dieback within the canopy. I included this this photo. It's a different tree. Okay, yeah. Sorry, different tree. Now we're moving to 551 Utah Street. The previous tree on Rhode Island can be replanted, so it's with replacement. The next site here, we have 2 trees at 551 Utah Street, and both of these are ash trees, and they are also showing severe decline within the canopy. Again, greater than 50% dieback, much greater. I would consider that probably 75, if not 80% dieback. And from this view, the tree looks pretty small, but I included this photo just to show this person walking by. It's actually a decent, large sized tree. So again, the concern is decline in the canopy like that could mean that there is loss of root strength and decay and decline, and that could lead to the failure of the tree. And so that's why our staff posted these with 15-day notices as opposed to 30-day notices. So both trees are in severe decline, and we're concerned that there's great failure potential here. The last one for this particular item is 900, what we call X, and I didn't circle back to this, but there was a comment made earlier. The X, sometimes we put the address in quotes. The idea is to draw attention to the tree's location. And we don't want someone to literally look, they should start with looking for 900 Carolina. The X is to let them know that something, it's not typical, it's an atypical setting. So that's something we use internally to flag that. So typically our staff will say, if it's in a median like this tree is, they'll state that on the posting notice so that folks looking at the postings online or on site can get information about where exactly the tree is located. This subject tree is a liquid amber or a sweet gum tree. It's a deciduous tree, but this photo was taken in early June last year when the tree no doubt should be in full leaf. So there's significant dieback within the canopy, estimated by our staff as approximately 80% dieback. And so this is the tree that our inspector posted just last week when they're putting the removal notice on the tree. Now it's deciduous, so this is not a completely dead tree. There are parts of it that are still alive, but the amount of dieback in this canopy, we would not expect to see in a deciduous tree. And so they identified it as a hazard. Again, this would be removal with replacement, and 900 block of Carolina. Again, the X is to try to flag it for folks to understand that there's not an immediate 900 address in that proximity. And it at least lets people know that there's something about that address that they should be asking about. Again, we add additional information in the posting. We want people to understand what tree we're talking about. I can't tell you, but every now and then how many times we put a posting notice on a telephone pole and they think that we're referring to a tree in front of their own home. So we do put in additional information on the postings to make sure that the public identifies the correct tree. But these were the reasons for posting these with the hazard notices by our staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for your presentation. Looks like we have comments from the public. So we'll take this time to get to those.
We do have Catherine Blum. Go ahead, Ms. Blum, you're able to speak.
Good morning, or almost noon. Hello, I am the chief instigator of the Carolina Green Space, which is where this tree is located. And I have been in touch bits and pieces with SFDPW, urban forestry folks. I can see why it needs to be gone. We have a question about, as we are a street park, we are a member of the San Francisco Parks Alliance. We would like to have some input, if possible, for choosing the replacement tree. And also I'd love to figure out, may we put it somewhere else in our ginormous median, which is 960 feet long and 26.5 feet wide. We're currently doing a project at the north end called the Skyline Terrace, which has a community challenge grant. And I don't know if we can incorporate a new tree to replace this one up there, or if there's a way to, we just want to be able to have input with regards to this decision and the timing and what goes where, if that's all right. That's the end of my statement at the moment. Oh, and by the way, the tree is located more closely in front of 1004, 1006 Carolina Street, if you wanted to update the location of it.
Thank you, Ms. Blum, for your comments. Would the Bureau of Urban Forestry like to comment on that?
Good morning, Chris Bock with Urban Forestry staff. You know what I'll do is we may have some other folks. So why don't I'm going to take some notes, of course, and maybe at the end of the public comment, I can just follow up on that. If that's okay with you.
Yes, that is. Thank you very much, Chris. Let's move on with the next public comment.
Okay, we have Josh Clipp. Go ahead, Mr. Clip. You should be able to speak.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. Hey, one suggestion, Chris, while you were talking that came to mind in terms of replacement and, whether it's going to be replaced or not. I've noticed on these hazard tree hearings that we're going by district. So maybe one suggestion would be to say that it will be replaced within that district. Regarding the tree on Utah, I reported that tree more than a year ago because it's been extremely painful watching it sort of die this slow death. I would also like to point out that on that same, just that one block, there is also a ginkgo that is basically a sawed off 1.5 inch, 6 foot tall stick. There's also a magnolia that was planted by Friends of the Urban Forest that is dying for lack of water. And there are 2 fern pines around the corner on Mariposa that are in horrible condition because they have not been taken care of. So, I want to encourage anyone with the authority to make a difference to look at not just a single tree on a block, but to look at what's happening along the entire block, because all of this work, by Friends of the Urban Forest or all of the work by volunteers with Public Works to put these things, and not just volunteers, employees of the city, to put these trees in the ground is for naught if they go in the ground and then they die. And that particular block has been a source of consternation for me personally, having walked past those trees week after week and just watching them die and be powerless to do anything about that. I don't live close enough to water them myself. If I had a 1/2 mile long hose, maybe I would, but I do not. And so if there is anything that can be done in the process of replacing the tree on Utah that can also look to the nearby trees, I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clip, for your comments. Would the Bureau of Urban Forestry like to respond to that comment?
He said he was going to respond at the end. We have one more speaker.
Okay. Oh, you're talking about for all the comments moving forward. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. We shall do that.
We have Lance Carnes. And go ahead, Mr. Carnes. We should be able to hear you.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to ask to share a screen again, so I'll disappear, but I'll be back.
Okay, you should be able to share your screen and unmute yourself.
Hold on a sec. I'm trying to get this thing shared. Okay. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Mhm.
So let's see. So we're still on let's see, order number 7. Let's see. Okay, so 1119 Rhode Island. Let's see if I can. One sec, I'm trying to reduce the pictures on the side so I can see my slide. Okay, great. So 1119 Rhode Island Street. Physical posting notice is shown on the left here. Unfortunately, the inspector wrote in 1119 DeHarrow Street, which is not correct. So by all rights, you should repost the tree with the correct address. 900 Carolina Street, number 34. Inspector noted, this tree is very clearly declining with 20% living canopy. It could be replaced at a future date when planting funds return. Unfortunately, last week, there was a new listing of a removal, and Buff is planning to, while it's not adjacent to homeowners' responsibility, we will ask if they would be willing to water a tree from Buff. So they're not volunteering, they're being asked to contribute $1,500 of watering activity. The two trees at Utah have a companion tree. So trees number 4 and 5 here have a companion tree number 6, which is listed as a posted 24-hour tree, which is a particular problem for me in general. Trees posted 24-hour emergency removal. Here's a couple in District 2. They're still in place 4 to 6 months later. Those are not emergencies. Here's an emergency tree removal notice. The latest version of it has no date on the notice. And it says this is a 24-hour emergency removal notification. This notice cannot be protested, but 24 hours from when? Here's a strange thing I found while digging into the database. Here's a tree that was posted 24-hour in 2016 and removed in 2020. So that's 4 years. Actually, there's something really wrong with that, but I can't figure it out. And here's something here. In the year 2020, all trees posted for removal, 15 and 30 day, which is the ones we're concerned with in the hearings, 334, not removed, 78% of those are still standing.
30 seconds.
279 of them, 172 are not removed, 62%. So of all the trees posted for removal, 69% are still standing. So, and the source I used was DPW's tree database as of January 17th, 21. So take a look at that in your spare time and marvel at trees that cannot be protested.
That's your, thank you. That's your time.
Thank you, Mr. Carnes, for your comments and your presentation. I guess if the Bureau of Urban Forestry is going to respond after the meeting, that's okay. But if you want to respond now, that's okay too. Let me know.
Thank you. This is Chris Bock with Bureau of Urban Forestry. And I want to thank everyone for their patience today. We were a little relieved to see that the inauguration wasn't literally conflicting with the exact date of this hearing, but it was not our intention to have that conflict. So I just wanted to go back, going back to Ms. Bloom, Catherine, I hear your feedback, and for sure our inspector is aware that when there is that relationship like you have with the SF Parks Alliance, and there's a lot of elbow grease being put in by the community, we can definitely talk about input on replacement species and placement. A lot of the time, if there's neighboring canopy, even though there was a tree there, it may have to shift because of competition from those neighboring trees. So we'll definitely take a look at that and be in touch with you as well. Mr. Clip, for sure, I took down notes about the ginkgo that's sawed off at about 6 feet, magnolia, lack of water that's in decline, and the fern pines. Hold on a second. You can hear me fine on your end? Is that right?
Yes,
We can hear you.
Okay.
I think
Okay,
we need to mute Mr. Carnes.
Okay, I just want to make sure you weren't trying to like have me dial back in. So hold on a sec. We'll do, I might be able to just. So just to, I did get Mr. Clip's feedback about that site. It's just one site, and yet there's trees right around the corner with all those issues, including the magnolia, lack of water, the fern pines on Mariposa that look like they're struggling. So we're going to go take a look at those sites as it relates to the tree on Mariposa. And then also I got the feedback from Mr. Carnes regarding the posting notice being incorrect for 1119 Rhode Island. I see your post. I saw what you showed, and that definitely looks like a problem. So we'll take a closer look at that. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. And then as well, any of the database things, the points that you brought up, we will definitely take a look at those as well. I appreciate you pointing those out to us. As we move towards greater transparency, we expect we'll have more and more folks wanting to dig in and look at data. And I think when it's not matching up with what you see, it can create confusion. So we'll definitely be taking a look at that as we move forward to continue to increase transparency. So thank you for your patience today. We'll be following up on some of these items. Some of those items might potentially get included within the resulting decision. Some we might follow up with individual members of the public specifically. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris, for your comments. It looks like there's no other further comments from anyone else that's hasn't spoken already. So if there's no public comments from anyone that's new that has not spoken, I would like to.
Excuse me, there was a message in the chat from Ms. Blum asking, was there any sense of a time frame about the removal?
Would Bureau of Forestry like to address this comment?
Sure, we will. The goal would be to try to remove the tree within a month of the end of once all appeals are expired. So we would typically try to remove that tree within 1 month once we know whether or not it's appealed to Board of Appeals. So in the meantime, that gives us plenty of time. We can work in parallel together to follow up on some of the items that you mentioned, to work on replacement location and species. Thank you.
You are muted, Mr. Ng. You need to unmute yourself.
Apologize for that. Sorry.
Okay.
And if you have spoken already, you will not be allowed to speak again. This is for those who have not spoken or have come to the meeting late. But otherwise, if there's no additional comments, I am going to close this hearing. So it looks like there is not. So this hearing is now closed.
Thank you.
Thank you.